So, okay, I have been immersed in the first documentary we're making for Kainos Crossroads, and one of the themes in it is the is big tech and the role it plays in the power structures in our lives, and Yanis Varoufakis' concept of techno-feudalism, this idea that we're kind of at the end of capitalism when we're moving into a kind of a form of feudalism, kind of defined by big tech. So I want to get into that also, just to frame for anyone who's just joining or hasn't seen one of these films yet. In this first month of Kainos, we have been asking a single question to all the guests and kind of theming the questions around this, which is, where do we go from here? Which we ask completely knowing that none of us really have an answer to that, which is kind of the point in some ways. But by that I mean, we seem to be in a time between worlds, in the sense that the liberal world order, this kind of agreement that we all grew up with of creating a global village, multiculturalism's tied into that, a sense that really national and tribal identity was almost wrong and should never happen, and instead we'll be in this kind of global village, which really turned into a global form of capital, really more than anything else, it really served that. But I think there's then below that level, a much deeper level, which, I know we've talked about at times, Liv, and has been quite a big theme of my work, which is the crisis of meaning and purpose, and a kind of deeper sense of lostness in the collective project of culture right now. And I think all of this is happening at the same time. And so when we ask this question, where do we go from here? There's a bajillion different threads we could go down, and lots of different ways to answer that question. And we've had lots of different answers to that question. I wanted to start with you because I know you have covered this a lot. You're really sharp on thinking around this topic of big tech, right? And specifically tech utopianism. I want to start there. This idea that tech can solve our problems, can fix climate change, can kind of solve our political instability, seems really more relevant today than ever. So what comes up for you when you think of tech utopianism? Like, what does it bring up for you?
Well, I don't think it's fully wrong. I don't think it has to be a thing that is completely sort of smirked at as a concept, because in principle, if we can build tech that is in service of our higher values, then it would continue to be a tool that serves us, and enriches our lives and reduces scarcity and unlocks abundance, and thus makes the world less rivalrous. Because obviously a lot of our problems are born out of sort of a scarcity and forcing us into this, like, essentially, nature is red in tooth and claw type and dynamic. And the sort of the main argument that techno optimists push forward is that it has enriched our lives. Our lives are better than they ever were before. We have much more abundance, and I mean that is true in many ways. That said, you kind of have to have your head in the sand if you aren't noticing that there are these sort of mounting externalities accumulating both in space, in our, like, on the surface of our planet, whether it's like the layer of PFAS that we are now all living in, the plastics that are everywhere, other forms of environmental degradation, the chemical makeup of our atmosphere that's changing because of the sort of externalities that our technologies are producing. And that's essentially creating some kind of mounting debt into the future. And at some point, that debt, in principle, will catch up with us. And the techno-optimist's hope is that we will reach some kind of escape velocity whereby we can just, like, pay off all that debt. I would like to believe that's true, but the trouble is that seems to be, until we figure out this wider concept of, like, how we build new technologies that don't create other problems down the line that we are constantly sort of having to play catch up with, I worry that we're going to basically reach these, like, planetary boundaries before we can reach that escape velocity. And what sort of also comes up to me is this idea, and it's not my thinking. I got this from Daniel Schmachtenberger, really, who sort of first explained it to me. But his point was, right now, well, in an ideal world, you want to have your core values and principles and ethos laid out very clearly. And by we, I mean like humanity, whatever those principles are, and there doesn't have to be one singular one, it can be many. And then that's the foundation. And then built upon that are the like sort of social superstructures, like the way that we interact with one another, the effectively the way, yeah, like the game theory kind of that into like it dictates the way that we relay our ideas and values amongst one another. And then built upon that is the technology. And so the technology should be in service of the sort of social superstructures, and the superstructures should be in service of these core values, these I don't know what the right word is, aphorisms, whatever you want to call them, but these like principles. If you have that, the pyramid going in that direction, that's good. But if you invert it, and unfortunately, that seems to be what we're currently at, where the technology is kind of built first, then out of that are born the sort of social superstructures, and that those then dictate our values. That's where you run into real trouble. For those of you who maybe aren't that familiar with my work, most of my content over the last few years has been built around this concept of this thing Moloch. Moloch is just like the personification of game theory gone wrong. And it's the thing, where you end up with these sort of externalities and these race to the bottom type scenarios. And yeah, he explained it to me as like if you have if you let the technology dictate the superstructure, and the superstructure dictate the values, that's where you get Moloch running the show. And at present, that's what we're seeing. And look at social media. That was born out of people being like, oh, I want to grow my business. What's the best way of like connecting people? They built the technology first. They built Facebook first. Then that created this emergent social behavior, and out of that, we're now getting values. So we need to figure out a way to flip that in order to truly unlock the sort of techno-optimistic, techno-utopian future that people sort of talk about. So that's why I don't want to like completely smirk at the idea. I think I want to live in the culture series type future. If anyone's read the books, the culture series, that's one of the more like awesome sounding techno utopian futures that could exist, where you've got like digital minds, humans of all sorts of like into weird sort of subspecies, but they've basically unlocked abundance. They've got almost all the galaxy and the resources of the galaxy at their disposal, and like close to some very high level of intelligence to sort of figure out how to manage all of these resources, and everyone just gets to do what they want and like live how they want, and it's really great. I would love that. That sounds rad. But at present, the technology is running us. We are not running the technology. And now, of course, that's where people then say, yes, but that's why AI is so different. That's why we need to build super intelligence, because that is essentially a new life form that has intelligence in of itself to figure out how we can have a better relationship with technology. Again, sounds cool in principle, but there seems like a bit of a chicken and egg situation there, because it is both, in some ways it's the values of technology is building the AI. So it's like, how do we not have Moloch building the AI that is supposedly meant to save us? That's the sort of $250 question to me.
Yeah, to me too, in many ways, and we we can maybe get onto the AI alignment problem, this idea of how do we align AI to human values. It's a nice way in, actually, like the idea, okay, we're going to align AI to our values. Now, a few people have pointed this out, that we don't know what our values are. So how on earth are we going to do that? But there's an even deeper question there, which is where, I've also found Daniel Schmachtenberger's thought very useful. And there's parts where I think it needs to go further in terms of the generator functions, because let's imagine, okay, we have the base of the values that then dictate, how we behave as people and in society, what kind of institutions we build, they then, and the technology we build, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's, the deeper level of our values is what we believe to be real. Like, what do we believe the world is? And I think the technology we have today is a perfect expression of what our cultural story tells us about the world. Because for about 400 years, in the West, certainly, we've had a cultural story that the world is understood and only really means anything if you quantify it, right?
Hmm.
Only what can be quantified is real. Quality, your lived experience of listening to this right now, or sitting here, or being in love, or whatever it might be, it's not real. It's an epiphenomenon of matter, as a really strict, sort of materialist neuroscience would refer to it. And if that is the story, then it's pretty inevitable that the technology we build is going to maximize that. So I think a really simple example, you brought up the social media example. I just last week interviewed Douglas Rushkoff for Crossroads for the documentary we're working on, who, if people aren't familiar with Douglas's work, he's also on Substack and worth checking out. A media theorist and, really great writer as well. And, he was talking about the origins of this very psychedelic origins in the internet, and also going on the internet with Timothy Leary. He was the first person to take Timothy Leary online. And Leary said, you're like, oh my God, this is stronger than acid, because it's this realm, it's this very powerful, altered, an other world that we enter. Now, it began as this, really hippie Gaian, like, let's create a Gaian consciousness. Let's all connect with one another. Let's go into this psychedelic, expansive other world and see what magic we can create. And that was the original idea. And then when people realized they could make money out of it, it immediately became, okay, how sticky can we make websites? How can we keep people on here? And then, of course, then the attention economy grows. So if we had different value systems and a different sense of what reality is, or what matters, let's say what matters. If we had a sense that actually what really matters is deep human connection, thriving, being immersed and in a real, authentic relationship with our environment. If someone came along and said, hey, this technology, this beautiful way to do that, let's sell stuff on it. Let's sell shoes on it and bicycles and everything. Someone would have said, or the majority of people would have said no, because the system itself would not respond to that. So we are so far from that as a system, though. So very, very, very far. And so, like you, for me, it's an eternal conundrum of how we start doing that. So what are some of the ways, like what are some of the things you've seen perhaps recently and thought, okay, that's a way to do something different with tech, or to start to change the narrative in some way?
It's worrying that nothing is jumping out at me immediately. Well, the first thing that pops to mind is actually Substack, right? That I don't know why. I can't put my finger, at least I don't have a coherent answer as exactly why, but Substack feels like it has a different flavor to it to some of the other. It feels like fundamentally very decentralized. I know that's not strictly true. They do have obviously algorithms and such. There are people behind the scenes who are choosing those. But there's something about the way that you're like, it's providing a platform for people to choose how they build their own business of communication. And there's multiple ways you can monetize it. So that, I don't know, that like just intuitively feels directionally that. Give me okay, what's one that you think is, and I'll see if I can iterate from there.
Well, I just want to pick up on the Substack point, because it's interesting. I'm just thinking, there is a fundamental structural difference between, say, Substack and like Instagram, in that Substack is based on mailing lists ultimately.
Right.
And so you can leave anytime you want. Whereas like Meta, do you remember the Simpsons episode where Marge joins a cult and they're like, you can leave anytime you want. And then the shot goes to this kind of like mad field of barbed wire and mines and all this weird stuff. It's like it's saying that that's kind of the energy of the other social networks. But
right. So that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It gives its users greater agency. So actually that's what it is. It's an agency builder. So maybe that's what you're touching on. Whereas like I was, in some ways, X, since its takeover, is trying to give people, you can now monetize and make money from it. But actually, it's not. I was just thinking, I was like, oh, if I wanted to diversify, because most of my following, I've only just really started my Substack. It's very small. I want to do more with it, but it's like, oh, I have 250 times more followers over on X. Why would I ever leave that? But you're right. There's like no easy way. Like I don't have direct access to those people without ever using that platform. But yes, Substack if I needed, if I wanted to go and start my own Substack, I've now got direct ways to contact people individually on a sort of personalized form. So yeah, so it's anything that is like increasing agency for users where they can employ their own wisdom to try. If they choose, if they want to quit that game, they can do it easily with minimal personal cost. That's really like that's what a wise, benevolent technology or platform feels like to me. Something that like really gives its users maximum agency and isn't just like, it would prefer you to stay, but you're staying not because you're dependent upon it, but because you choose, because you truly think this is better. So yeah, anything that, I mean, it's like comes back again to my favorite saying is love is that which enables choice. Something that is like truly giving people more ability to make their own choices and like educating them to the point where if they choose to leave, like that's the best decision for them. Another thing that just like popped to mind when you mentioned the cult thing, my partner Igor and I were recently talking about that. We were like, what makes a good cult? Or no, what's the best way to approach the idea of cults? Because we're increasingly leaning into like the world is trending more towards, as like persuasion technologies get better and better, cults are going to become a bigger and bigger problem. And one way to like mitigate the risk of that is you should not be in fewer than 3 cults at any one time, because they will counterbalance and counterweight one another. So it's okay to be in a cult, but you've got to be in at least 2 others, ideally more. And now they're going to be counterweighting each other. You can, it's as with always, like, everything in moderation is best, or at least like some kind of counterweighting. So, yeah, having cults that are like, I mean, yeah. Anyway, that was just a thought. But I don't know if that really answers your question.
It sort of does, but I'm already thinking about creating a service that helps you aggregate your various cults into one easy sort of access point. I would think I'm going to be way ahead of the curve. I'm way ahead of the curve on that. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting thought, right? Like this. I'd like you actually. I'm curious for you to unpack that, right? The spread of persuasion technologies, because I'm writing a book right now, or a book proposal for a book about AI and religion, and how AI and religion are intertwining, and looking at the AI religions that have sprung up as well, and it's quite fascinating because you can, in a weird way, AI could democratize religion, but also really intensify this very kind of postmodern, I'm spiritual but not religious, like I pick and choose. There's a great book by Tara Isabella Burton called Strange Rites, where she kind of really unpacks this notion that religion really spreads with technology. And so the printing press was fundamental in spreading the Protestant Reformation. And in fact, Martin Luther was in some ways a Trump-like figure of his day. He's probably getting a lot of Protestants mad at me, but he was an absolute expert at using that technology. Like, he would print pamphlets just crapping all over his critics, like really like funny, like, they're getting like crapped on by the devil. And then, people had never seen this kind of stuff before. So people just looking at this pamphlet being like, oh my God.
The first memes.
The first memes, and like a level of propaganda, people just like, in the same way that we're completely bamboozled by the kind of Steve Bannon's kind of flood the zone with information so that no one knows what's going on. It was a different situation, but it's similar in terms of probably its impact. And so, the spread of, you can actually track the spread of Protestantism with the spread of the printing press. I've seen that in a few diagrams on that. And the internet has spread the kinds of religions which are pick and choose, Burton calls them like remixed religions. Like, I want a little bit of Buddhism, I want a bit of Christianity. I don't really want to be like bogged down by anything, be in 3 cults at the same time, right? So it's like I want just all these bits and pieces, and then I'll make a kind of spiritual but not religious. I'm saying this as someone who's done that, by the way. So I'm totally, I'm as guilty as anyone of that. And I'm not even sure it's a bad thing necessarily, but yeah.
Right, that's what I was about to ask. I was like, is it that bad? I mean, it sounds, when you describe it that way, I'm like, well, yeah, I want, like, if you can take the best bit of what you believe are the best bits of each religion, but of course the thing doing all the heavy lifting there is the idea that the person knows how to choose the best bits. And again, like, I don't want to live in a world where people don't. I think it's a worse world to live in, where people don't have the freedom to choose the best bits. But again, as we're starting to, it feels to me that it almost feels like the digital realm and whatever the sort of, oh, I don't want to say the word entities, but whatever the like things are that like these social, like the memes themselves almost have a life of their own, and they're using us as a medium through which to spread. And as much as I'd like to think that like consciousness is infinite, it feels like it's somewhat of a scarce resource. And I don't know, the more time I spend online, I notice the less alive I feel, the less of my own like a sort of, I feel like I have less agency over my own destiny because when I'm like spending so much time online, doing social media and so on. So it feels like it almost feels like it's like sucking some parts of our decision-making faculties away from us. And so, yes, as you then get more and more of these like digital religions competing for our attention once again, like in the attention space, and if it's true that at the same time our own agency to discern between what's good and actually, what we actually want versus what it tells us we want goes down, that seems like a very scary direction to be going in. But yeah, but still, it's probably better than like living in whatever period of the time where it was like you must be, Islam is the only way to be, or Christianity is the only way to be. Sort of those really dogmatic times where people had absolutely no agency, and like if you didn't go to church on a Sunday, and if you didn't say the right prayers, you were bad, and like that is also like another form of crushing the human spirit. So I would still rather take this than that. But yeah, I guess what you're sort of getting at is like, is there like a deep fundamental truth of like that is gets you as close to the principles of God? And is there a way that are those the bedrock from which we should be trying to like build all of our choice making faculties from? I would like to think so. I mean, what I've been doing personally, like one of the posts actually pinned to the top of my Substack is I call it like, I wrote it for myself. It's like, these are the 10 principles of that I would like to live by. These are like the 10 principles, I call it the 10 principles of win-win, but it was like my own version of the 10 commandments that like make me like resonate with, I don't know, like my soul. And they're like in many ways, like some of them are kind of obvious. I can like, one is what is it? The It's a belief I want to be true. The universe is fundamentally and radically abundant. Scarcity is the exception, not the rule. As such, a mindset based in scarcity will ultimately self-defeat. It's a little bit now, is it like objectively true? I don't know, but my soul tells me that it is true. And so now, as you mentioned, this is getting into this like postmodernism thing. Maybe I'm just deluding myself. Can we function? I would like it to be where people could go away and like really from first principles come up with their own set of values that are so meaningful to them. But can we function? Like, can we function if everyone is then having very different values that they like are now based upon and then proselytizing? Or is it that actually there is a set of values that we will all naturally converge upon because there is actually an objective truth? I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah,
it does. Well, I think I think this taps right to the heart of the question we opened with about tech, right? And about what does it actually mean to build ethical technology. Fundamentally, either values are something that exist beyond us, that we come into contact with and then channel through us, which is my position on it, or values are things that we can create. And C.S. Lewis said we can no more create a new value than think up a new primary color, because values come from some sense of, without, if we don't even want to be spiritual about it, some sense of embeddedness in the world that makes the values clear. Like if any of us saw a child drowning, we would save that child. We don't stop to think about, what are my values in this situation, right? And it's just like instinctive care that happens. And, we see that other animals doing, acting similarly. And a sense of, like perhaps the sense that Josh Fry, who does the Emerald podcast, I think has some great episodes where he touches on this, but this idea of like natural law. Like if you look at law is sort of based on values, like ultimately in some deep way. And then this idea of my friends used to make fun of me when I talked about natural law, because I was like, yeah, but there's like the law of the jungle in a way. But I was kind of joking, but also kind of not joking, because the law of the jungle is the law of nature. And the law of nature seems brutish and inconsistent and arbitrary. I think it only looks like that because we don't spend much time in nature. I think groups of people who do spend time in nature have a more nuanced perspective on it. Yeah.
Well, and also because when you think about like, oh, the leopard just caught the deer, but then the leopard stands on a thing and it, like gets a spike through its paw and then it has to let the deer go. And it's just like, oh, both like had a bad suffering moment there. But if you zoom out and look at the whole thing, you see the dance of everything like interplaying and also, slowly evolving over time. So zoomed in on a very small part, it's almost like a little pixel moment. It doesn't look very pretty, but you zoom out and see the full picture and this full like beautiful tapestry emerges. And maybe that's what sort of, the people who live fully in it, they are like, they're flowing in it. They see it. They've like seen how it's sort of like the actual sort of ebbs and flows of it. And that could be the case of what, again, we're just in this microcosm of, I mean, this is kind of like the the accelerationist argument is, it's just like, yes, it seems like everything is scary right now because we're in this transition phase. And I mean, a lot of them even believe that it's like it's almost humanity's job to like seed the next evolution and then die out. That goes against my personal principles of like finding win-wins. It's like, if it's true that digital sentiences can exist and have moral valence, I would rather them come into existence, but I also want us to exist too. I want us to set it up so that we can like, do the coexistence thing. That is a more interesting world. Like one of my principles is that things are the natural order, some kind of natural law that tends towards greater complexity. And the world, the universe wants to become more and more interesting and have more and more cool stuff and like true diversity and stuff in it. And so it would be a more diverse universe if we have both digital sentiences and biological sentiences. But then this comes down to the question of like, yes, but can there be sufficient abundance whereby we can go through that transition and both make it? And that's not clear to me. It's not obvious at all. So yeah. There could not be a more interesting time to be alive. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I mean,
but again, maybe that's my bias.
I genuinely think the level of complexity we're living through, I don't think other humans have lived through. I think humans have had complex lives with a lot of tough moments and tough decisions to make, and much harder lives than us in many ways. But the complexity is at another level, I think.
The superstructures have never been this big.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. And the technology
it's never been fully global. Right. And there's never been this like, there's been sort of, I think there are different like sort of inner spaces. There's the consciousness inner space that we go to when we, do a journey or whatever. I certainly I did ayahuasca for the first time a few months ago. And I don't know, I certainly went somewhere else. Like it was like, but it was like a dimension inside of me, something. But then there's also this other dimension that we're talking through right now. This other, the digital realm that exists somewhere else. And it like has a like increasingly large interface with this physical realm. What's my point? But
I'll pick up on that. I mean, that I think that those two realms, this is one of the arguments I make in my book, The Bigger Picture, is that the skills, the capacities, the cognitive, emotional, psychospiritual skills that allow us to navigate, DMT realms, like in ayahuasca, or in my case, just pure DMT, they are very similar to what we need to navigate a world full of seemingly conscious AI entities, which is increasing. And the memes, and not just the machines online, but the people as well, because online it is a kind of ever-shifting shamanic world where, it's abstracted, symbolic, wild, chaotic. And there's a point, I think, that came up for me a second ago, which I don't want to lose, which was that, this idea between like nature and technology, and the idea of this split that comes from that worldview of we're going to evolve into the machines, or the machines will evolve and then will die out, I think is also points to this fundamental split that we have in the Western mind between us and nature. And this story popped into my head I haven't thought about in years, of my friend Cameron Adams, who was one of the founders of Breaking Convention, the psychedelic conference I co-organize. He's an anthropologist, and he told me the story of his PhD research in anthropology, which I don't know when it was. I'm going to say the 80s and hope he doesn't get mad at me because I've gotten the date wrong, but I think it was the 80s. And he was going back and forth to this indigenous community in Mexico, and he went back after like a couple of months, and he noticed that they had a Ziploc plastic bag that was really delicately hung up on this string. And he asked what's going on. He'd left it the last time by mistake. And he asked what's going on, and they were talking about like the bag was the most fundamental piece of technology in the village. It's so much more useful than anything else they had, and it would go like it was very, like people take turns on it. You have to wash it, and so this is true of human beings. Like there's this kind of noble savage fantasy that indigenous cultures just are in this perfect state of equilibrium with the environment. Being in relationship with nature is being in relationship. So sometimes it's absolutely brutal and it's trying to kill you. It's actually trying to kill you quite often. Sometimes it's feeding you and it's wonderful and it's beautiful. You're completely embedded in it and it's like you are a part of it. But I think when we think about tech, my hope for tech is that it becomes integrated with nature. So for example, the people using AI to decode whale language, that really excites me. Because if we can talk to whales, that's one thing. But imagine being able to talk to cows in a factory farm. Like how fundamentally that could shift someone's perspective on whether this is a good thing to do or not. Like that's the kind of thing that could radically change consciousness that we can only get through technology. Like you can take acid and go to a factory farm, but I don't know if you can guarantee that what your cows are saying to you is real. Don't do that.
Be a bad trip. Well, I mean, I wouldn't mind a farmer, the person running the factory farm, to do it, because I don't see how they could make it any worse than they're currently doing. That might be the thing that they finally need to like wake up from the haze that presumably that they are under, just like this. Because it's the thing we're fighting against, as you say, is like the commodification of life, the commodification of the sacred. And it served us, commodifying everything served us to get to this point. But it's like we are now at a state where the debt is mounting so much. And like the topic of factory farming, because I've been like working quite closely on it lately, because I recently came into some money and I had randomly pre-pledged that it was a poker tournament just before I played. I was like, you know what, I'm going to give 20% of whatever I cash in this to reduce factory farming or improve the suffering of animals, at least on farms. And then I go and have the biggest poker score of my life off the back of it. So talk about a win-win. So I've been like really digging, because I've got to figure out how to deploy this money into this. And it's there's never I when I was tweeting about it recently, it was actually very encouraging, because like I had a couple of tweets go viral, and I was expecting it to be more like my center left followers or just like center left accounts that would like agree. There were a couple of like really what I would call far right accounts I would never normally interact with. They're like these anonymous accounts that like say some pretty like stuff that is like far off in that direction. And they were so against it. They were like, this is an abomination on humanity. This is an absolute, this is everything we should be standing against. And that was such a like beautiful thing to see. I'm like, damn, like even people who I would think are like, as I would have assumed would be like pro commodification or just like bordering on what I would actually, and I don't like to use the word fascist lightly, but bordering on that. Even they were against this. So I'm like, there's a signal here. How could we leverage this? This is like, because in this time of like maximum polarization, that this is a thread that seems to unite us. And so who are the people who are actually for something like this? It's the corporations themselves and the people that for some reason think it's okay. I don't know. Like what gets into someone's head where they just think that maximizing efficiency and bottom line and like externalizing everything just like to maximize shareholder value. What is that sickness that gets into people's minds? How do we like, because that's what it is. It's this like maximum obsessiveness with quantification. And that would be an interesting thing. Like what are the examples of where someone has been like woken up from that? And maybe that is it is just psychedelics are the way to like sort of snap out of that haze, because it's so hard to quantify a psychedelic trip. I defy people. I mean, even though I'm like, oh wow, that one was an 8, I was 8 high out of 10 or whatever. It's like you can't. It's so complex and weird and continuous. Like I don't see a way to like metricize that. But I don't know. It does seem to be a creeping force, and uh, oh yeah, because I mean we've talked about this before. Like even the psychedelic industry is starting to get commodified, and that feels very, very scary. Because again, it's like some things like don't commodify a ceremony, but then at the same time, are in order for them to happen in this economy, you kind of have to.
Yes, yeah, and yes, that's a really, that's a good point. In order for them to happen in this economy, I've actually swung so far around, on this question that, I'm not really that keen for psychedelics to be legal. In some ways I am, some ways I'm not. In some ways I would like them to stay underground, because then at least there's a sense of they cannot be captured in the same way. However,
Right.
you can have both with psychedelics, because the beauty of psychedelics is that people can grow their own mushrooms. They can extract DMT fairly easily. Um, and it's a bit different in that sense. Um, but there was something else I was going to pick up on before that. What was the point you meant just before you mentioned the? Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was such a big point. It overwhelmed my head. This is something that I haven't quite articulated yet, but I think as you were talking, it helped me sort of articulate it, and it's maybe been a thread through some of these conversations and my work recently. Like we are in this at once a hyper polarized time, but I think also a time in which our existing categories like left and right, libertarian, authoritarian, all these things, they're sort of breaking down. Like it's so confusing to really understand. Like is Trump Republican or right wing, or is he like tech focused? Is he like what's Elon
Right.
Musk doing? Like it's everything is kind of up in the air. The left has completely eaten itself alive and has no real sense of what progress is, and they're incredibly silent. They're sort of soul searching, which I think is probably a good thing to do. And of course, some of them will get more extreme and double down, and some of them will try and find something new, and something new will emerge in that. I'm very keen on keeping like continuously having the conversation of what does progress look like, because we need progress. I think we're obsessed with
Mm.
progress as well in an unhealthy way, but I think we still need it. We need forward motion, growth, evolution as part of the universe.
But we need to
But
find new measures
yeah,
of it. Like one of the things
exactly.
I was like having an argument with someone on Twitter was he was like the techno capital machine serves man, and I'm like okay, tell me how you know that, because I think personally the techno capital machine serves itself, that as a primary thing. It serves itself, and that when it aligns with what's good for man, then it also serves man. But there is no that's a sort of by the wayside thing. Um, and he's like, because life is, we have made so much progress. I was like, okay, what are your metrics of progress? And he pulled out the classic things, child mortality rate, blah blah blah, all of those, which are true. Those metrics have gone up. But I was like, okay, what about mental health? What are your metrics for mental health? And he didn't really have an answer, because I don't think we do have any good metrics. And again, if it comes into this chicken and egg situation, is it even good to metricize mental health? But like by many measures, like suicide rates have gone up in the last 10 years. Depression rates in teenagers, like social media, etc. I mean, I'm assigning causality there. I assume it's largely social media and iPhones, just because I noticed that's the thing that makes me most miserable. But that by many measures over the last 10 years, things have declined. Now, again, it all depends where do you look at, probably mental health is better now than it was 200 years ago, where it was like most women are dying in, or like not most, but many women are dying in childbirth. And it's like, it was rough times compared to now. But I do think it is very notable that something in the last 10 to 15 years has made mental health, particularly in young people, decline seriously. Like, you cannot call that progress if the people who are going to be taking over the mantle of this world soon, and already are more unhappy than they've ever been. And like, so if you were to try and distill progress down, that's really the one that matters. It's like, are people happier versus before? And again, it's like the whole point of happiness is it's the problem with happiness is that it's so hard to even define. Is it like peak experiences, or is it like how someone feels on the day to day? I think wisdom would tell us it's actually like that's sign of good. Are you in a happy relationship? It's not like, oh, well, then he proposed to me and then we went and did this vacation. It's like, no, how do you feel on a random Wednesday afternoon where it's like you just got back home from work and you're having a chit chat? Like, are you happy in your interactions there? And it's such a hard thing to measure and quantify. It really is a very qualitative thing. So yeah, again, I've lost
there's interesting ways
my brain is struggling to keep on the thread. It's interesting to observe.
No, that's good. It's because the thread wants to move around. We got to go with it. We're following the thread. It's yeah.
Good.
So it's interesting. John Vervaeke has this great line and like, this is a good example of quantifying the qualitative, right? Is he talks about this study which I think it's I'm going to get it slightly wrong, but basically something like the best way to determine someone's general sense of mental well-being is to ask them what matters to you so much that you want it to continue after you die, and then identify that. And then the next question is, what are you doing right now to make that happen? Right? What are you doing right now to continue something after you die? Because that touches on something beyond us. I think one of the biggest roots of our unhappiness in our culture, Western culture, at least the culture I'm in, is this purposelessness, is this sense of it's all about us. We're completely trapped in our own minds. We're not really connected to something outside of us. I think that's why we're seeing traditional religions coming back in some circles. I think it's why there's this deep hunger for something more. Even like the UFO phenomena, I think is I don't think it's caused by that, but I think there's a really complex, and I don't think it's not real either. I just think there's a complex interaction between our collective unconscious and that phenomenon. And so this, but I want to go back to, I've remembered now that there's this really important point you made about the factory farming and how people on the right were, like people you weren't expect, suddenly find this kind of cause. I think because our categories are all breaking up, there's more scope for that right now. For people to connect who didn't connect before. The biggest one was, of course, Luigi Mangione killing Brian Thompson. Right. That was this incredibly powerful, what I call a breach event, where I genuinely, in my whatever, like 8 or 9 years doing internet stuff and covering, sort of culture, I've never seen anything like it, because I've never seen Ben Shapiro get owned by his own audience in his comments section, who are the really very far right leaning. I would say maybe center right.
They're not far right. They're not far right.
They're not far right. Sorry, that's true.
Right.
He's establishment right. That's very true. Yeah. That's a good point. He's not far right leaning, but are very a better way to say that is they're very consistently sort of center right or right. They're not. You're not going to get like a really like a very woke social justice warrior.
So he was presumably against Luigi, and his audience were pro him. Yeah. So that's interesting, because that's a divergent, because that would be, the establishment view is that like Louis, because it's like rule of law. You don't, if you don't like someone, you don't go. And I mean, personally, while I very much can empathize with people who hate US medical insurance, having been a recent transplant to the US myself and trying to figure out whatever the hell this medical system is. At the same time, like, don't go lionizing someone who's ultimately killing someone in cold blood. That is a
no. I'm with you on that
breakdown of. But that's interesting that his user base. Well, so that seems such a strange breach event. I have to wonder, because we are now in the era of like very convincing bots. Very like, do we know that all of his fan base who were going off at him, like the responders, were they actually real? Because to me, the Luigi thing was so strange. It felt like there was almost, I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but it like, there seemed like there was something that was like latching on and amplifying this and making it like almost making it into a breach event. You know what I mean? That it was like
Yes.
some kind of digital manipulation of some form by someone or something.
I don't see. I think it was. I don't think so. I think it was basically the unexpressed rage at unaccountable elites finally coming. I mean, the piece I wrote about it, my argument, which came out back, well, when was it? December, I think. Which I think is my most read piece ever. It was that piece. I argue that really what it represented was a re-embodiment of accountability in a very visceral way. So what the system does is it abstracts accountability from human bodies. It's like, no, well, this is going to be, we're just going to get a PR firm. It's going to go to the lawyers. Everything, BP oil spill. No one, the Purdue Pharma family, no one's gone to jail. Like
No.
only one, I think one banker went to jail for the 2008 crash in Iceland, which, full
Ridiculous.
respect to Iceland, but not exactly the hub of
Right.
of things. And so this deep rage at unaccountable elites, and there's something, and I don't think people should go out shooting CEOs either, because also it's for any other reason, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's actually going to make things much worse for everyone. But
That's the thing. Is yeah.
It's not going to be an effective strategy. But I think that moment was this sense of like, oh shit, people are ultimately human beings in bodies, and accountability does end in the body somewhere for all of us.
Yes.
Whatever we do. And so what the fascinating thing was that, and I think this was the most important thing, the media was absolutely right in saying, don't celebrate the death of this man because he was a father and a son, a father and a husband. And that's absolutely true. But what's fascinating about it is that's exactly what corporations don't do, because they quantify people. And so what the media could never do was say, he's more valuable as a CEO than he is as a father. But for United Healthcare, he's way more valuable
Completely
as a CEO.
true. Yes.
Exactly.
That's why like the personality of an average, of a classic corporation is that of a psychopath. By definition, it dehumanizes, it commodifies, like the Smithfield Foods and what they do to their pigs. The 70 million pigs in America, of which like the majority are. Can you hear me? Okay, because I've lost you for some reason. Weird, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, yeah, no, okay, it was something. Yeah, it commodify it literally views everyone as a number on a spreadsheet, or everything that can be, from which value can be extracted into its own profit, its own coffers. That is fundamentally psychopathic behavior. And so, yes, you're right. It's like it was actually a rehumanizing event, which is why, yeah, I mean, if one zooms out, that I don't want to see any more of it happen, but it could on net be, who knows? We don't know how this is going to play out.
Yeah, and I mean, what I suggested in the article was that a better way of resisting is what Edward Abbey, the environmentalist, and he was an environmentalist and kind of anarchist writer. He created this term monkey wrenching, which is where you destroy the machine. Like, let's say someone's going to bulldoze a forest, you just go and pour sugar in the gas tank of the bulldozers. So it's also sort of anti-tech, not really anti-tech, just sort of, it's just practical. I've always liked it because I'm like, yeah, that's great. No one got hurt. You destroyed a machine that was designed to do a task you don't want to happen. It's also really PR friendly. Like, people are not going to be up in arms about it. In fact, most people will be like, good for you. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, that's the difference between mischief and violence.
Yes,
you're doing a mischief. You're doing a sabotage, but it's a mischievous form of sabotage, because you don't want anyone to get hurt directly. Whereas there's like violent sabotage where you're actually, and that's what the Luigi thing was. That was violent.
Yeah,
sabotage.
it's different. It's a different, and it spirals as well. And so there's this. Yeah, so I think right now, one of the things that gives me the most hope is that there's capacity for a strong sort of anti-corporate movement, that spans left and right, because nobody likes corporations. Like, nobody likes, there's no, I mean, I'm sorry, there's probably someone out there, but
there are plenty. No, a lot of the like techno accelerationists are just strictly pro corporation. It's worth paying attention. Like the effective accelerationists, the EAC community, Well, I mean, again, they're not a complete monolith. There's definitely some sort of ideological diversity between them. Some are like actually just like more like spiritual in their beliefs that like just the techno capital machine will birth our new god that's going to be, and whether it keeps us alive or not is beside the point. It's just we need to, it's our duty. And then there are others who are just like, as I said, the techno capital machine is, it is their religion. It is this magical thing that has our best interests at heart. Is this form of decentralized intelligence. I would agree with the latter. It's definitely a form of decentralized intelligence. I think it's not like a particularly, it's a bit of a zombie in that, again, it seems a little soulless, but it's definitely smart. Like the market mechanism is incredible. It's such a like ingenious thing that it does, like, you know, processing information. But there's just, it's something about this. It's the complexity lost. It's this over reductionism that like by when you reduce things down to prices, you're trying to compress so much information into singular metrics. And that is a lossy process. And that's why, you know, when you price up a patch of forest, of old growth forest, it's like, how do you price that? Well, we know what it will sell on the market for because that's the price of lumber right now. And it's like, what about all the other values? What about the biodiversity it provides, the soil stability, the oxygen, the like the other all the creatures that live within it? They also have a form of market value, but the market fails to capture those. And so it's this like, that's again one of the tools of Moloch. It's like this excessive oversimplification and reductionism, for like, because it's simpler. It like makes things simpler and information easier to process, but it's not actually doing the job that it's meant to. It's not truly taking into account all the information. So that's, I think, what people are like somewhat like waking. I like to think people are waking up to that and feeling it. You know, whether they describe it in those terms or they might describe it differently, but that's the, I feel like, the lever that needs to be pushed upon more by people who are like in this space thinking about this stuff and like, how do we communicate this to others? But at the same time, we want to, part of the problem is that when like I try and wade into these sort of conversations on Twitter, where a lot of my follower or like people I interact with on there are like the sort of techno capital is perfect, we don't need to change anything, is, I don't know, like with any of these things where you're going against someone's intuition, you have to acknowledge the benevolence that it has done as well. So it's like, yes, it has been amazing for us up until now. Yes, it's great. It's still much better than communism or any of the other isms that could have replaced it. But there are these problems that are mounting. So like that's sort of where I'm thinking in terms of like the comms approaches to this. But it's difficult because it's like we don't have a clear North Star of what we're trying to, like, you know, they're like, oh, it's okay, so you want to like build a new form of capitalism that it actually takes into account better state, you know, stakeholders and so on, that minimizes externalities. What does it look like? And it's like, I don't know. I wish I, you know, so that's I think that's kind of like what all of our jobs are. It's like, what is this new form of information processing and incentive structure and like what you know, what is the new game theory that we're moving into? How does it look like? How does it work? And it's because it's so hard to express in language and simple terms that, you know, by its nature, because every time you do, you're trying to do this compression function again. Yeah. And I don't know, my gut says it's going to be some kind of hive mind thing. It's probably not possible for, yeah, exactly. It's not possible. The reason why we struggle to describe it so much is because we're just too, you know, a single mind with a single line of words.
Yeah, it's this kind of complex, you know, I mean, this in 4E cognitive science, you know, the idea that, you know, we don't just think with our brains, we're embodied, embedded, extended. One of them is extended, where our cognition is extended through one another. We actually think through one another, not by ourselves. Like, there, you can't just be a solitary mind. No, you literally you will not survive. You know, we know from that horrible experiment one of the Romans did. We just babies that weren't touched.
What experiment?
Oh, there was I forget, I think it was a Roman who was like, what happens if you just don't interact with babies at all? Don't pick them up, just like only feed them. And of course, humans don't survive like that. Like, none of the babies survived. So yeah, it's a really grim experiment. So that, you know, that is, we have to be in contact with one another, and our environment and our minds have to be in contact to have any meaningful solution to, you know, wicked problems that just don't have easy solutions. One thing I think is and at least this is where I'm focusing my attention, is what human beings can change quite quickly is culture, and at least subcultures, and just different aspects of culture. Because culture, I mean, look how different culture is now to like the late '90s. It's complete. A really good example of that is to watch Woodstock '99. If anyone hasn't seen that incredible documentary on Netflix about when they tried to redo Woodstock in 1999. I have one of my favorite absolute niche genres is failed festivals, because I put on events as
Firefest.
well. Firefest. There's two Firefest ones, in fact. There's two all competing documentaries. I've seen both of them.
Ooh.
And then the Woodstock '99 one is a classic. I don't know if there's that many more. It's the Schadenfreude is very strong. Not so much with Woodstock '99, but you just see. It's just a good reminder of just how misogynist culture was then, how very different it was. It's not that long ago. And so I think, and I came across this great line by oh my God, I'm gonna forget his name because we're the thread is running through us and we're forgetting stuff. It'll come back to me, but the definition of culture, which is 7-word definition of culture. Seth Godin, got him. Seth Godin, 7-word definition of culture is people like us do things like this. And it's really, really useful because it's true of a country, and it's also true of like an organization or even a family,
Mhm.
right? And so if you like split those two bits out, people like us, that's about that sense of who are we, that deeper inquiry into our humanity, our
Identity.
metaphysics, identity, and then do things like this is like, well, our tech, what we do, how we express ourselves, etc. And that makes it a little bit easier in a sense to think, actually, activism is very often focused around like, let's change the world. It's such an abstract thing, and it implies that the world is like we're the center of everything. It's got like a bit of main character syndrome in it, like that we're in some big story and we're going to change it so that we can have a better kind of outcome. Changing culture, I think, is more humble, and it also recognizes that we're part of much larger systems, environments. We're part of a cosmos. We're part of systems of mycelial networks we never even see. Right? We're kind of small in the grand scheme of things, but what we can do is change culture, and so that's what. Then the bigger question is how we do that. I'm gonna wrap up the Substack because we're gonna go to Q&A in the group here on Zoom, and we found that it doesn't really work because you guys can't hear what they're saying, but maybe Liv, we can say
Well,
goodbye
what
and,
if
and
we
thank you.
repeat it? Oh, I see. Because what if we repeat back the question?
We can try it. You try it? Let's try it. Okay, let's try it. So you guys are part of an experiment now as well. Not as bad as the Roman experiment I mentioned earlier. It'll be way, way more ethical. So guys on Zoom, would you like to ask a question? And actually maybe, yeah, Young, go for it. And then Nico, maybe you could type the question actually into the Substack chat. Maybe that's actually an easy way to do it.
Yeah, I feel like there's a few things that I want to
Oh, I
say
can't hear
before.
you. Can you
uh,
hear? Can
I
you
can
guys hear
hear.
Young? Oh, I can. Okay, that's strange.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead. Young.
cool. So yeah, thank you, Liv. I first want to say that like listening to you felt kind of cathartic. I don't know why. Just like it's almost like you are, even you're not angry. Like I feel like you are helping me expressing some anger. I don't know. Like I feel lighter and more in flow. And
Thank you.
also, I really love your idea about like entering like 2 to 3 cults together. And I thought of like during the process, I was
Not
kind of like,
two, minimum three. Like think of it like a milking stool, that minimum three.
I actually thought of during the process of the conversation, I thought, maybe we could start the cult of doing psychedelics in Animal Farm. We can start the cult of doing mischief in forest bulldozers, and we can have a cult of observing failed festivals. So maybe we can start from these three and build from there. Maybe if you are a member of a cult of technological accelerationists, you have to also be at these three. I think that could be interesting. Anyway, so I did remember like when you did the interview with Rebel Wisdom, the two of you spoke, and one thing like I don't remember much from that, but like one thing that somehow really stuck with me was that you shared how Daniel Schmachtenberger once sort of pulled you to the side or something and told you that like invited you to be more in touch with your feminine side or something along those lines. And so I'm
Mm.
really curious about how that like development had
Yeah, no,
unfolded.
okay. So I'll just repeat this back for the people on Substack. So the question, you mentioned that in a previous interview I did, I talked about when someone, again, actually, Daniel Schmachtenberger, this was back in 2018 when, like, shortly after I met him, sort of pulled me aside when we were talking, and he was like, you need to get more in touch with your feminine side. And in that moment, I was like, I didn't know what he meant, and I was a little bit offended, and I was like, what does that mean? And now I look back on it and I'm like, that was one of the best pieces of advice anyone has ever given me. Because, I'm clearly female, but like in my head, I'd always felt like I'd always valued masculine things. I'd always thought, I was a big tomboy. I was proud of the fact that I was a tomboy. I was always attracted to like what are considered more like, it seemed to be more masculine pursuits in terms of the people that tend to do them, which is like physics, poker. I mean, that's like crazy. It's like 98% male, 2% female, heavy metal, guitar, like all of these things. And I was like proud of this fact, which was, in fact, now I look back on it, I didn't respect the notion of femininity. And that's because I didn't really understand what it actually was. I was like imagining, when I thought of femininity, it was like a caricature of femininity. It was like pink lacy stuff. It was like having a little doll. It was this very childish view of it. Whereas for some reason, my view of masculinity was a much clearer thing to me. And I could see like the like lower childish forms of masculinity, but also like the higher form of masculinity, of like strength, of striving, of protection, the classic things people would tend to describe it as, excellence, pushing boundaries, etc. Those are very easy for me to visualize. And I think that's the like kind of like the sort of cosmic joke when it comes to the sacred feminine, is that it's like, by definition, it's hard to it's transient. It is the space in which we operate. It is the system of roads with which the masculine cars can drive down. And so, it's like the what is the metaphor of like the fish in water? Like the fish just doesn't see the water because it is the thing it's around. That to me is the kind of sacred feminine. And it's the thing that dances and like it like you can't exist without it. But it took me a number of years from that moment where he like sort of planted the seed. I mean, I had just a series since then of like very unexplainable, well, at the time, phenomenon happened to me, which basically like slapped me around the face of like, it taught me humility of like, you think you know how the world works, because I was very much like a materialist, a physicist, rationalist, again, like the classic sort of quantified male energy. I got slapped around the face by reality to show me that there's a bunch of other stuff going on that I do not understand and I did not know existed, including like, alternative forms of healing, almost the supernatural. And that to me was like showing like that's the feminine, that's the sacred feminine. It's this thing that is like, it's harder to describe, but it's very real, it's very powerful, and it's incredibly beautiful, and it's really fun. It's just so fun. The masculine can be fun too. But so yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying I feel like I'm like finally getting there now. And like I really try. It's still like my bias is to naturally like be to be comfortable in the masculine. So I have to like work harder at being in the feminine. But since I've started doing that, like life has been flowing. Things have been coming so much easier. And it's just so much more interesting.
I love that, because it ties so beautifully into what we've been speaking about a lot, which is quality and quantity. Quantity to me feels in this, at least in the Taoist sense, like very much a masculine thing. It's like direct, and then quality is implicit. How do you can't really touch it or see it. It's there, it's real. But this dance between the two of them, I think, is so important. It's also really meta right now, because Yang, I couldn't hear a word he said. It was some weird Zoom glitch, right? And but it was also the implicit. So it was like the silent, right? This is a sort of silent. It's the silent question. And I think there's something really important happening right now. More broadly, of the re-emergence of, Skylar Brown, one of our guests last week, she spoke like the re-emergence of the feminine, like the re-emergence of a real sense of like a kind of a healthy masculine and healthy feminine together. And I found that counterintuitively, from running lots of men's groups, that when men want to get more into their inner feminine, which to be honest is not really the main issue with modern men, I would say. I think that we need to connect to a healthy sense of masculine. But to do that, to have balance, it actually helps to go direct more into the polarity you're in. And that opens up somehow a freedom to go, okay, wow, okay, if I really connect to my masculine, I have space for the feminine inside me and around me. But if I'm sort of wishy-washy and neither connecting to either or overcompensating in one area, something's out of balance. And it's a bit esoteric, but it really does seem to work. And it's the opposite message men have received. They have received the message, that the masculinity is sort of deficient in some way. It's certain men, so there was a kind of
because what you're saying to someone is you're telling them like the thing that you're in is not the right is not for you. Or there's something wrong with it. It's like you have to we're in the things that we're in. Let's love that. You have to love your embodied self, however that love turns out for you. But you have to start from there, and then you can have space to love whatever the other polarity is. I had to come to I wonder, it's like I had to just come to more love and appreciation for the softness of a female, and it was something I'd always spurned, and yeah,
it's beautiful. We've got time for one more. Teresa, was that a hand raise? Yeah. And then Terry, we'll do you, Terry, as well. We'll do two more. We'll go. Can you go a little bit over, Liv?
I can keep it very short. I just would like to know.
I can't hear Teresa either, so that's fine. You keep going.
I can hear her.
Okay.
It's
my problem. So yeah, just so you're.
Okay. Super quick. How would you translate that sacred feminine into the world of tech? Something I'm currently interested in, and how would that manifest?
Okay, so Teresa asks how to translate the sacred feminine into the world of tech. Well, I mean, the first thing that pops to mind is helping, because ultimately the people who are controlling and building tech right now are the people are overwhelmingly masculine. I don't think the answer is which was what just sort of the societal organism was trying to do, which was we need to have a enforced diversity of people working on this. That was, again, it was doing a kind of Godhart's law thing, where it was oh, if we just put a minimum number of women in, then that's going to make the tech more feminine. We tried it. It was a good idea, but it seemed reasonable in principle, but it clearly didn't work. Because why? Because it was doing again, you're trying to quantify, and you're doing it on surface level values. The feminine is not just the genitals of the person who happens to be working there. It's something much more profound and deeper. So, I mean, maybe a thing that just popped into mind, I haven't thought this through at all, but helping the technologists develop a better appreciation for motherhood. Because the motherhood is the most embodied visceral form of the sacred feminine that we can all kind of identify with. And I'm sure some technologists have good relationships with their mothers, but I would be curious to poll some kind of polling on how is the the ones I know, of the well-adjusted ones I know that they do have a good relationship with their mothers. The less adjusted ones I know have pretty bad relationships with their mothers. I mean, they also have bad relationship with their fathers as well. So it's there's a whole other stuff going on there. But so yeah, that's probably a starting point. There's because again, it was something I had to go through myself. Part of my big ayahuasca journey a few months ago was I had never had any interest in being a mother, none whatsoever. It just I'd never had that gene that every other little girl seemed to have. It was and I sort of almost I'm that's great that people do that, but it was a kind of ick factor for me. And then that whole journey, well, one of the journeys was this is what motherhood is. This is what it's like. And I mean, I won't go into the details for you all, but it was so intense, including envisioning myself birthing and also other things. But it was showing me how cool it was. This is the raddest, sexiest, most is powerful. It was showing me that it's a powerful thing, because that's what like my inner masculine associates with coolness. And so helping people truly see the power and beauty and like the sacrifice and the awesomeness of motherhood will get them to be more in touch with the feminine, the sacred feminine. I think that will help them. I mean, interestingly, I never had an issue of seeing Mother Earth as a thing. Like, I've always been like so attached to the earth and environmentalism. So that was maybe like how my inner feminine was actually just like still finding its way through. But you know, I think a lot of them don't see they don't see the beauty in it, or at least like they're just so detached from it that it's not present in their minds. But yeah, that's off the top of my head probably the most. That's a starting point, but how you do that is another thing.
I love that. So what a great question, Teresa. Thank you. Like that.
Yeah.
Set my mind in all sorts of directions, and a lovely answer, Liv. Like what popped into my head is like the tech structures that we have right now are not that old, historically, 30, 40, 50, maybe 60 years or so, right? And when the feminine is suppressed in something, I think it always comes back because it has to, because it's part of the fabric of reality.
Right.
And, Christianity, for example, like the Virgin Mary is not a massive figure in the Bible. It's mainly men. But, medieval Europe, the cult of Mary was huge. And look in South America today, like because you need the female side of the Godhead, you have to, because it's real, And so I'm curious about like what is already maybe even invisibly to us emerging in tech through like what aspects of the feminine are already emerging. I don't think that means we shouldn't do anything, because I do think we need to actively sort of change the structures. But there's a guy who does the YouTube channel Meme Analysis, which Nico, if you have a moment, you might be able to find his name, Meme Analysis. I interviewed him a few years ago. Really interesting dude. And he looks at the internet as kind of Jungian. He looks at memes as Jungian archetypes, really. And he had this great explanation of the deep hunger for the feminine that a lot of tech engineers have. And he pointed out that like the matrix means womb, right? So there's this whole sense of like the womb, and a lot of these tech campuses act like a mother. It's like, hey, you just need to code. We'll do everything for you. We'll wash your clothes. Right. We'll bring you food. We'll drive you around. So that's kind of like they're looking for. I think his point was like they're looking for surrogate mothers as well. So I think that's one place where it expresses in a sort of weird way. But what does the full emergence look like? I'd love to see that. So. Do we, Terry, we have a final question from Terry.
Yeah, I want to go back to your discussion of indigenous values. I've been following Jordan Hall's conversion to Christianity very closely, and one of the things he said that set me back is indigenous cultures have no defense against Moloch. Christianity brought a defense against Moloch as self-sacrifice. Carrying your cross, Jordan said, or he put it in secular terms, face into what sucks. And that until individuals can face into what sucks, we can't come together in a hive mind. And just to add one more point, Ali, when you said come up with an example of how to resist technology, the first thing that came to my mind is I won't use the automated checkout in my grocery store. So I just wanted to say something for the role of the individual there.
Did you hear that, Ali?
I did not, but good to repeat it for the sub people on Substack as well.
Yeah. So just to repeat, it's good. So Terry was following I haven't actually followed this myself, but apparently Jordan Hall has sort of been either talking about or going through a conversion to Christianity, and part of his point about the vulnerability of like indigenous wisdom and indigenous cultures is that they were by definition very vulnerable to Moloch. And what Christianity has over indigenous cultures in terms of like robustness against Moloch was its ability to encourage people to self-sacrifice to do self-sacrifice when necessary. And this concept of like because what is Moloch? Moloch is the thing that like sacrificing your other values to win at a narrow goal. And so kind of a way to like, I don't know if it's the inverse, but like something to protect against that is like you do a very anti-Molochian act if you sacrifice for yourself. You sacrifice yourself for the good of the whole. And that is a high virtue that Christianity, with the like bearing of the cross and so on, has pushed forward. And that's a really interesting point I hadn't considered. I will say, so it just brings me back, not to, I feel bad like talking about my shit so much, but like one of my 10 principles was around this concept of sacrifice. It's selflessness and sacrifice are not as noble as they appear, for such acts are fundamentally lose-win. The best acts, if you could find them, are mutually beneficial. So I don't know. For me, I feel like when I do agree that it is a virtue when there is no other choice to save the whole, to do the self-sacrifice. That is obviously a high virtue thing, and society could not probably function without it in some degree. But aspirationally, we should shoot to find the scenarios where we don't need to force someone to sacrifice for the good of the whole. We are so, at least like not like so much so that like it like permanently curtails their chance to have an experience, like to have a life or whatever. I think there are moments of like self-sacrifice that we will derive meaning from, but aspirationally we should look, we shouldn't over like, because that's the problem when you have like, one of my critiques of organized religion is that it like often will, you end up with like this idea of martyrdom. That's like some of the, it seems like a core principle of a certain religion that I will not name out loud, but it lionizes the idea of being a martyr, and that can very easily then like go into like essentially death cult worship. And so as a goal, as like a higher North Star, we want to try and find interactions which are just truly like omni-beneficial, where the good of the whole is also benefiting the individual. But that doesn't mean to say that there won't be situations where we should do self-sacrifice for the good of the whole. But we should try and move beyond it if possible. So maybe that's where, but I don't know how this, I don't know enough about indigenous wisdom to like comment whether maybe they've already got some of that baked in. I feel like there probably must be. For an indigenous culture to have survived, it would have had to have done some self-sacrifice now and then, because like, you know, I'm sure they would have had heroes doing stuff for the good of the tribe, etc. So yeah, I don't know if that's like, I'm just like spitballing here, but it's a really interesting point. I want to read more of Jordan's stuff if he's talking about this.
Well, he's coming on Thursday on here.
Oh,
so
okay.
you can join that. I'll send you a link.
Yeah,
so, and you know, yeah, it's really, I wish I'd heard the question as well, Terry, but Liv, you did a great job of explaining it. Like, it made me think of the Rene Girard's scapegoat mechanism, because he points to, you know, the sacrifice of Christ as this moment that breaks the dynamics. Paradoxical, because, you know, Girard pointed out, we get at each other's throats as human beings, and then actually we can't be in proper coherence because we project all of the sort of negative energy in a system onto one person. And you see this happen all the time. I mean, once you know about this, it's constant part of human, you know, and Christianity, it does have this very powerful way, because effectively, oh shit, we scapegoated God. Oops. Right. So it breaks the whole system. It's like, oh, maybe we shouldn't scapegoat anymore, because actually it inverts the whole thing. So there's something very powerful in that mythos. I'm looking forward to hearing, Jordan's take on that. And then also, because we're wrapping up now, Jordan will also be, as Teresa said, cancel culture is very much a scapegoat mechanism. Yes, spot on. Yeah, just, you know, Jordan wrote this incredible piece, situational assessment. He wrote a couple of them sort of around sort of maybe 2017, 2018, maybe 2017, which were very influential in my thinking at the time. And he's going to, the theme next week is to give us a new situational assessment rather. And, you know, as he mentioned to me, like, he's got a different perspective now. So it's going to be really fascinating how his conversion to Christianity has also changed his situational assessment of what's going on, because he's got such a brilliantly incisive and complex mind. So I think it's going to be really fascinating. As fascinating as this brilliant conversation, Liv, this has been one of my favorites so far. So, like, thank you so much for coming on. Yeah,
this was great. I loved it. And,
cool. And so, Liv, where can we track what you're up to, just so we can?
Well, I would normally say X, Twitter. I mean, that is where I'm like usually scratch padding the most. But I am really trying to sort of diversify and in particular transition over onto Substack. So I would love anyone on Substack who's following along, or anyone wherever who's listening to this, to come follow me there. It's called Win-Win. I am going to try and post more of my like I'm also on YouTube with my like podcast, which I record in this studio. But I want them all to be uploaded to Substack as well. And just generally I'm trying to retrain myself to do more long form writing, because I have been caught by the Twitter trap of just like, oh, I'm moving the needle because I have a good thought and I'm going to it's low effort. And I noticed that my brain is atrophying a little through that.
Yeah.
And I really love that Substack is like really like signal boosting long form content.
It's a way to think about what you think, like, I mean, for me, I've noticed, because I've been working on, we've been doing these conversations. I've been working on this documentary. I haven't really written a long form piece since actually the Luigi Mangione one, really. And I found that I've wanted to just write update pieces just to know what I think, because there's so many different threads. And it's really, for me, I think for a lot of us, like that's why journaling works, right? It's a great way to just figure out, what do I actually think about this thing? And then it's a lot of fun in the process of sort of weaving it together. But yeah, please follow Liv on Substack. You can probably just click on her icon somewhere. And yeah, we'll look forward to that, Liv. I'll hold you to that. I will hold you to a long form piece.
Please.
I'd love to see that. I would love to see that. Yeah. Great. And thank you everyone here on the Zoom.
Yeah.
Wonderful people. And
Thank you so much. It's really good to meet you all. Appreciate it.
And let's unmute and say goodbye to Liv in our classic fashion. And bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye, and thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thank
sounds great.
you.
Goodbye.
Really appreciate it.